Okay, hi everyone. My name's Adam Roberts, and I am a food blogger from the website The Amateur Gourmet, and I'm also the author of a new cookbook that some of you just purchased called Secrets of the Best Chefs. Thank you so much for having me here at Google. This has been really cool. I got to eat at the big, what was it called? Big Table. It was very good. I took pictures. I'm going to blog it on Monday. So anyway, I'm going to tell you all about myself and the story of how I started my food blog and how that led to this book. And actually, Google plays a role in that story. So, you've got to. This is like interactive storytelling. Okay, so anyway, so what happened was I started my blog back in 2004. I was in law school at Emory in Atlanta. And I came from a family where nobody cooked. My mother didn't cook, my father didn't cook, my grandparents didn't cook. And for some reason, going to law school, I just got very interested in cooking. And so I would watch the Food Network, and I would sort of write down recipes. And then one day, I gave it a try, and I got behind the stove, and I made, I think it was Mario Batali's tomato sauce. And I was hooked, and I just started cooking all the time, and it was a lot of fun. So around that time, like in 2004, which was my third year of law school, two of my friends suggested that I start a food blog. And back then, in 2004, it wasn't like an established thing. I'm sure all of you guys read food blogs. Are you guys all big food people, cooks and readers? Okay, yes, okay, one person. So anyway, it wasn't like an established thing. And so back then, I started my food blog in January of 2004, and I called it The Amateur Gourmet because I was learning how to cook, and I didn't know anything, and I wasn't an authority. And the goal of the blog when I started was really just to share all my disasters and things that went wrong and things that went right and what I was learning as it went along. So when I started my blog, I had about 5 readers, including my parents and my roommate and like maybe 2 other people. And this is where Google enters the story. Okay, so around at the end of January 2004, Janet Jackson, you might recall, showed her breast at the Super Bowl. Do you guys remember that? And I decided it would be funny to make a Janet Jackson breast cupcake. So I made a cupcake, and I had mocha frosting and a Hershey Kiss as the nipple. And it had the nipple shield. Remember, it had like a shield around her? Yeah, and I did like white icing. And I put that on my blog. And I went to school the next day. And when I got home, my site had 70,000 hits. And it was linked all over. And CNN actually called me and asked if they can come over and do a story on the Janet Jackson breast cupcake. And so Google enters the story here, though, because that post became so popular and went so viral that when people were Googling cupcake, that would come up as a top result. And so I actually had a picture of her breast at the top of that post, and I got flagged for having inappropriate conduct, and I actually got kicked off of Google after that. So I had to take off it was a whole elaborate thing, but anyway, I got back on, and so that's my Google-related story. I hope you like that part of my narrative. So anyway, so after that, I actually grew an audience. I had a lot of readers of my blog, and I sort of had to make a choice if I wanted to keep doing zany sort of cupcakey, pop culture things, or if I really wanted to take cooking seriously and really start to, become more of a serious home cook. And that's sort of what happened. And so in 2005, I actually sold my first book. It was a book of essays called The Amateur Gourmet, and it was about learning how to cook from point zero. Just, it was basically my story of knowing absolutely nothing about food and cooking and getting to a point where I could make dinner for a group of, at the end of the book, I'd make a giant 5-course tasting menu dinner for 10 friends. So that first book was about learning how to cook. And actually that book led the Food Network. It caught the attention of the Food Network, and they hired me to host a web show for a year called the FN Dish, which was sort of their FN, like Food Network, F.N. But then it was like Effin' Dish. They were trying to what was funny is they really wanted to create these viral web videos that would set the world on fire, but it was hard because they didn't want me to make fun of any of the Food Network people, and it had to be very PC and very, so actually it was funny. I got to interview Rachel Ray for that, and when I sat down to interview her, the director said, don't ask her any questions yet, we're going to start rolling tape. And we'll tell you when to start. So she sat down and I sat down and I said, hi, I'm Adam. And she said, hi. And like we just sat there in stony silence for 23 seconds, and I was like fidgeting and really nervous, and she was just sort of sitting there. And anyway, and then they said, okay, go, you could ask questions. And I started the interview, and she perked up, and it was great. But when it was over, I said to my director, I was like, if you want a viral video, you have to put those 23 awkward seconds with Rachael Ray on the web. And actually, if you Google that, you'll see there is a video called 23 Awkward Seconds with Rachael Ray. And that's like, basically, that was my crowning achievement in my year at the Food Network. And not shockingly, they didn't really keep me on very long after that. So it was so I had a year at the Food Network. And actually, the other sort of like controversial thing that I did there was Anthony Bourdain was a famous, or is a famous Food Network critic. He really doesn't like the Food Network. So when I was at the South Beach Food and Wine Festival, we stumbled upon him, and he was in a kitchen somewhere, and we said to him, you can do an interview with me and rant about the Food Network. You could say whatever you want, and we'll put it on the Food Network website, because again, the goal was to create these viral videos. And so they did, so he did, and he just, you could find that too if you want to, and he just rails against the Food Network. And actually, they put it on the homepage of foodnetwork.com, and apparently a lot of the Food Network stars called up the president of the Food Network and like, why do you have this video of Anthony Bourdain trashing the Food Network on the Food Network homepage? And they said, well, we're trying to go viral. So again, I lost that job after a year. Not shocking. But I'm telling you all this, I'm giving you my trajectory, because that all led to this book that is for sale in the back at a very reasonable $10. It's called Secrets of the Best Chefs. And so essentially, around the time that I finished the Food Network show, I realized that I wanted to go to the next level. I wanted to, if I was an amateur home cook and if I was self-taught, I wanted to now sort of go forward a little bit. And so the idea came to, what would it be like to travel the country and cook with 50 world-class chefs and home cooks, and to really cook with them side by side and to absorb as much as I could in the process. And a lot of chef cookbooks don't really adapt their recipes, or chefs don't really have the mindset of home cooks. They're thinking about how to feed large quantities of people. They're thinking of how to dazzle you with inventiveness and things that don't really apply when you're cooking at home. So I felt like I was in a really good position to be an advocate for the home cook while cooking in the kitchens of great chefs. And that's sort of how this book came about. So in 2010, I sold the book to Artisan Books, and they do the French Laundry cookbook. They do all Thomas Keller's cookbooks, so like a really great publisher. And so I felt really excited that I was going to get to do this hardcover, 400-page, color pictures. Because the last book, the first book that I wrote was just a book of essays. So I was ready to go on to the next thing. So the concept again was that I was going to travel the country, cook with 50 chefs and home cooks, and then each of them were going to teach me 3 dishes, and then I was going to go home and adapt the dishes for home cooks. And that's pretty much how it worked. So I started in New York. Melissa Clark is a recipe writer for the New York Times, and she's a cookbook author. And so I started with her, and I said to her, I want to learn how do you come up with original recipes that you can publish in the New York Times on a weekly basis? Like, how do you even think of like these recipes? And so she took me to the Union Square Farmers Market in the middle of Union Square in New York. And we went food shopping, and she just started grabbing radishes, beautiful radishes, and she put them in a bag. And then she got sugar snap peas and filled a bag. And then she saw sheep's milk ricotta and bought that. And she saw this beautiful loaf of bread, and she bought that. And so she started buying all these ingredients. And we went back to her house in Brooklyn, and she just started, it was like the Tasmanian devil. She took the bread and she sliced it and she put it in a toaster, and then she took the sheep's milk ricotta and put it in a bowl and stirred it around, and then she sliced the radishes and she sliced the sugar snap peas, and she stirred the sugar snap peas and radishes in a bowl with olive oil and lemon juice and garlic and anchovies, and when the toast came out of the toaster, she put the ricotta on top, and then she put that whole mixture of the sugar snap peas and radishes on top, and she said, that's crostini, that's the first recipe. And I said, wait, how did you do that? What? She goes, I don't know. She goes, that's how I do it. So it's just sort of like watching that process. And what I learned from her is that it's all about momentum. It was just like her energy of just like grabbing things and trying things. And she said, if you fail at it, just call it recipe developing, which is great. And she also said that, if you don't like the way something comes out, just rename the dish. And she actually wrote about this recently in the New York Times. She said, she says like she once did this, made this eggplant salad that was supposed to be like, just a traditional eggplant salad, but the eggplant was really bitter, so she just named the dish Bitter Eggplant Salad, and there it was. So I started with her, and then I, so I kind of think of this book as like sort of a mural or something where I started in this part and then I sort of grew outwards and outwards and outwards and outwards. So I thought, okay, I have her. Who do I want to cook with next? And actually, Rebecca Charles is the chef at Pearl Oyster Bar in New York, which is a really well-known restaurant there. And from her, I learned how to cook a la minute, which is to cook in the moment, to actually cook hot restaurant dishes on order. So she taught me how to take 2 pans and a pair of tongs and to make a beautiful plate of restaurant quality food. So she got these 2 pans, she put them on the stove, she turned on the heat. In the first pan, she added a splash of oil. In the second pan, she added butter. And in the first pan, she took fish. I think it was trout, it was cod. So she put cod in the first pan and started searing it. In the second pan, she put sugar snap peas and corn and heirloom tomatoes with the butter. So she had these 2 pans going, and she used the tongs to stir around the vegetables. Then she used the tongs to flip over the fish. And all this was going on at once. And by the time she was done, she poured the vegetables onto a plate. She lifted the fish on top. And it was the most gorgeous, and you can see it in the book. I mean, it's like the most beautiful plate of restaurant food. And all she used were 2 pans and a pair of tongs. And so like that lesson of just sort of seeing how with the most simple equipment, you can make really gorgeous restaurant quality food was really instructive to me, that it's not so much about the, what fancy equipment you have at home. It's really just about the rhythm of it and really understanding how to interact with food as you make it. And so that's how the book started to grow. And I went to 11 different cities. I went to Chicago, San Francisco, LA, Portland, Seattle, New York, DC, Athens, Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. And so I was really trying to create a portrait of American cooking and to try to get as many different cuisines and cultures and chefs, both high and low, and older chefs and younger chefs. We have a 24-year-old chef who was on Top Chef, and we have I knocked that microphone, like 60-something-year-old chef. But I really wanted to get like a panorama of chefs. And the hardest part of writing the book was not the cooking, and it wasn't the adaptation of the recipes, which I'll talk about in a second. It was just booking chefs. Chefs are difficult to nail them down, to convince them to do this book. I mean, because really what I was asking was for access to their kitchens. I was saying, let me into your kitchen and then show me what you do here, and there's going to be a photographer. And then a lot of chefs are like, no way, we're not going to let you do that. But the chefs who did let me in, actually, I think the reason that they let me in was that I feel like the more confident you are as a chef, the less threatened you are by somebody stealing your ideas, because it's not so much about the ideas, it's more about the philosophy of how you approach food. So as you read through this book, you'll see that each chef has a different attitude about food, and they sort of reflect their own personalities and their own personas through their food. And it has very little to do with like a secret formula or like a guarded recipe, as much as it has much more to do with, Daniel Patterson, the chef at Kwa here in San Francisco, is a great example of that, because he's all about the very best ingredients. He goes foraging for ingredients everywhere. And so for him, it's not about the secret formula of a recipe that he has to keep guarded to himself. It's more about getting these gorgeous radishes from, delivered to him by a farmer, and then going foraging for strange herbs and weeds that he then puts into the salad. It's not something that somebody can steal. It's more just like a way of teaching. So that was sort of how the book came together. And I actually, at the front of the book, in the front matter, this is the book again, I have the 10 lessons that I learned from cooking with 50 of the country's best chefs. And so I thought I would go through those and talk about them a little bit. So these are the 10 essential rules for cooking like a chef. And the first one is actually probably the most cliche. You've heard it before, but I kind of want to articulate my own slant on it, which is to taste as you go. Now, tasting as you go, you hear that a lot. You'll watch the Food Network and they'll say, taste as you go, taste as you go. But for me, what that ended up being about was about not just tasting for salt and not just tasting for whatever else you're tasting for. What you're really trying to do as a great chef, and what these great chefs did, is in their mind, they had a vision of what this dish should taste like, and then they were getting it to taste that way, which is something that a lot of home cooks don't think about. Most home cooks, I think, are pretty strict recipe followers. Most of my friends who cook for me or have people over for dinner, they follow a recipe like it's the Bible. It's like if it says a 1/4 teaspoon of paprika and they only have 1/8 of a teaspoon, they'll throw everything out and start. I used to do that when I started. Like if I didn't have exactly what I needed to make a recipe, I wouldn't do it. And chefs never do that. Chefs just adapt. They engage with their food. The real key is understanding the tools available to you to make your food taste great. And so for me, and you'll see this in the first lesson about taste as you go, Those tools are fat, and when I say fat, I mean olive oil, cream, butter. If you want to enrich a dish, I mean, every chef, I mean, this won't come as a shock to you, was generous with fat. I mean, they would take butter, plop it into a pan, or they take cream and pour it all. I mean, that's how they do it. And you don't have to do that at home because you're not trying to kill your family, ideally. But, just to understand that that's a tool available to you, that that's a way to enrich your food, to make it taste a little better. Like if you have, if you're making eggs, and they're not coming out as creamy as you want them, and you add a little more butter at the end, or you add some cream to the screen. I mean, it's just something. It's a tool that you can use to make food taste better. And then the second tool, of course, being salt. Taste as you go is generally about salting your food properly. But what's really interesting about chefs is they taste for salt at every stage of cooking. They're not just tasting it at the end and adding salt to make sure it tastes good. I mean, Michel Richard is a famous French chef that's in this book, and he was making a mixture that had raw chicken in it. And that's like the worst thing you could do in the world, is to eat raw chicken. But it sort of showed his mettle as a chef, that he just sort of ate a spoonful of ground up raw chicken to see if it was salty enough, and he added more salt. But that's what chefs do. They taste it at every stage. And the final thing that a lot of home cooks don't know about in terms of tasting as you go is acid. How to use acid to make your food taste better. And when I say acid, I mean vinegar, I mean lemon juice, any kind of citrus, lime juice. Chefs use acidic elements all the time, and it's such a remarkable thing how much better it will make your food taste. I mean, if you make something as simple as a chicken breast and you roast it in the oven and you take it out and you squeeze a lemon over it, I think that will enhance it immeasurably, because it perks up, it makes the taste pop in your mouth. And chefs use acid all the time. They use balsamic vinegar, they use cider vinegar, they use lemon juice, all that kind of stuff. So I think tasting as you go is so essential that's why I talked so long about it just now. Okay, the second essential rule that I learned cooking with the chefs was to put ingredients on display. And that sounds like a strange one, but so many of these homes, I got to cook with Alice Waters in Berkeley, and when I went into her home, she had these basketfuls of beautiful ingredients, like just really unusual ingredients that she'd gotten from the farmer's market, like watermelon radishes and things I'd never even seen before. And there were so many chefs that I cooked with who literally had the exact same thing. Their kitchens were full of beautiful ingredients that they put on display. In fact, actually one of the chefs that I cooked with, Anthony Martin, who's the chef at True in Chicago, had worked for Jules Robuchon, who's a legendary French chef. And he said Jules Robuchon's kitchens always had ingredients displayed in the kitchen to inspire cooks. And so when I was in the middle of writing this book, I bought a basket. I just went to a store and I bought a basket and I put it on my counter, and I made myself go at least once a week to a farmer's market, and I made myself buy things that I had no idea what I was going to do with them, and I would bring them home and I just put them in the basket. And it was amazing, because having it on display and just seeing it there was a trigger to get me to use it and to get me to cook more often, because I would come home after working all day. And usually what happens, I don't know if you guys relate, is you get home from work and the last thing you want to do is go food shopping. It's like you don't want to then get back into your car and then drive to the store to go food shopping. So if you have your ingredients displayed out there and you just have beautiful things, and you have a box of pasta, and let's say you have broccoli rabe out there or whatever you buy, and then you make a pasta with that fresh ingredient, you're much more likely to cook if you have ingredients on display. And also, it's just sort of the color and the actual liveliness of it, just sort of seeing this beautiful food in your kitchen just creates an environment in your kitchen that makes you want to cook in there, Just, I think these little psychological triggers that you don't think a lot about, they actually don't seem important. It probably seems like the least important thing in the world to put ingredients on display, actually can be the difference between ordering Chinese food and actually cooking. So to me, that was actually an important one. The third one is sort of tied up in that. It's if it looks good before you cook it, it will taste good after you cook it. So many times with the chefs in this book, they would be prepping something that it should not have looked appetizing at that stage, but it still looked beautiful and made me want to eat it. Like Charles Phan, the chef of the Slanted Door here in San Francisco, I cooked with him, and he taught me how to make this steamed chicken dish where it was a clay bowl, and he put raw chicken that he cut up into it, and he put slivered ginger and garlic and fermented black beans and scallions, and it was raw chicken with all those things, and he was about to place it in the steamer. But just looking at it, the raw chicken with all of that stuff, I just knew it was going to taste good, because something about the visual of how that looked, and I think that's really important for home cooks to understand. If you're making something and it's just not doing it for you, if you're making a dish that sort of looks gray or brown, and all you need to do is add green herbs or red chilies to make the color pop, that actually will make it taste better too. I think the visual ties into how things taste. So if it looks good before you cook it, it will taste good after you cook it. And that was really true throughout the book. And number 4 is an interesting one. It's use your internal timer. So it was funny, I cooked with Gary Danko. I keep referencing all these San Francisco chefs. So Gary Danko, it was funny, he taught me how to make a blueberry crostata. And he made the dough, he rolled it out, he put the blueberry filling in, he folded it up, and then he put it in the oven. And we walked away to do something else. And I said, wait, aren't you going to set a timer? And he looked at me like I was totally crazy, like a timer, you know. And chefs never set timers. I never once, in writing this book with over 150 recipes and 50 chefs, did I ever see a chef set a timer. And I started to ask myself, well, why is that? And I think it ties into what I was saying earlier about home cooks being slaves to recipes, where you feel like you have to cook it for exactly 50 minutes or bake the lasagna for 47 minutes and 32 seconds. That's not how cooking works. And cooks are engaged with what's happening in the kitchen at every stage, and that includes how long something is going to cook for. So with the crostata, what he was looking for is actually not even just looking, it's listening and smelling. So he smelled it when it was ready, and he looked at it, and it was golden brown on the outside. But what he was looking for, he was just looking for a visual clue. It was a very simple thing. He was looking to see if the blueberries in the middle of the crostata were at a boil, if the liquid was boiling, because there was cornstarch as a thickener in the blueberries. And the cornstarch doesn't dissolve until it reaches a boil. So that's all he was looking for, was for the liquid to be boiling at the center, and then he took it out of the oven, and it was delicious. But I think what's important about using an internal timer is to be engaged with food in your kitchen as you're making it. That idea of engagement. So I think people, when they follow recipes, are sort of disengaged. It's just, I'm going to follow this rule, I'm going to follow this rule, I'm going to follow this rule, and that will yield this result. It's sort of a mathematical way of cooking. And chefs are not like that. Chefs are totally, absolutely 100% immersed in their kitchen and totally aware of everything that's happening all at once and reacting to it as it's happening. And similar to that is number 5, which is to control the heat. You know, a lot of chefs, or a lot of recipes will say to you, put it on high heat, walk away, and come back in 30 minutes, or put it at a simmer and walk away and come back. And again, chefs would never do that. Chefs are always noodling with the dial on the stove, so that if something is boiling too rapidly, they lower the heat. If something is too low of a simmer, they'll raise the heat. But again, being really engaged with food as it's happening, and coming back and lowering it and raising it. And so that whole experience of being engaged with your food. The heat is kind of funny too, though, and this is sort of a tangential thing, which is that a lot of people ask me, what did I learn overall? Like, how has my cooking changed at home? And the biggest thing I say is actually the boldness, that I'm much bolder when it comes to cooking now. And the story I like to tell is Susan Feniger, who's the chef from Street in Los Angeles, and who was also on Top Chef Masters. And you might know her, she had a show on the Food Network called Too Hot Tamales, which was on a long time ago. But when I cooked with her, she got a pan, she put it on the heat, she put it on high heat, and then she started talking to me. And we were just talking and talking and talking and talking and chatting, and the pan was getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. And at some point, she's like, well, this is how I make my black pepper clams. And she just added all these clams to this pan that had oil in it, and it just burst into flames. It was like Mount Vesuvius. It just erupted in flames. And she did not flinch at all. It was like as if the room had just exploded, but she was just like, And I was like, whoa. And so actually, the way that I wrote this book is all the chefs that when I cooked with them, I took frantic notes. I was writing things down. At every second I was writing. Because what I didn't want to do is I didn't want the chefs to give me a recipe and then to photocopy that recipe into the book. Because I thought that would be totally useless for the home cook. I wanted to write it down. I wanted to write down what I saw happening in the kitchen, and then I wanted to replicate that. So my method was to take notes, write up my own recipe, go home, cook it based on what I saw and what I wrote, and then if it didn't come out right, to email the chef and say, hey, when I made it, it didn't come out correctly. So with that recipe, which was a black pepper clam recipe, when I was testing it at home, I invited my friend Rob over, and I was like, I'm going to make this dish tonight that Susan Feniger taught me. When she made it, she got the pan really hot, and there was this big flame ball, but I'm not going to do that. I'm a little scared, so I'm just going to get it pretty hot, and it will be hot enough, but it's not going to be flame ball hot. It will just be, moderately hot. He's like, okay, whatever. And so I started heating my pan, and like 20 seconds went by, like it has to get hotter, and a minute went by, and I was sort of like playing with like, do I want to do it now? I was holding the clams, and I had the oil. I was like, am I going to do it? Am I going to do it? And then at some point, I was like, okay, here we go. And I threw them in, and I had the exact same thing. It was a flame ball. And the difference was like when she did it, it was like, again, like nothing happened. When I did it, I was like shaking, and like I poured it into a bowl, and I was like giving it to Rob. I was like, here you go. He's like, what's wrong? I was like, nothing, you know. And it's, but just that experience of how chefs are bold. They're just bold. It's like that whole thing of having scars on your arms and knife cuts and burns. It's like they're just bold. And so I tie that into that thing of controlling the heat, which is that they get their pans hot. They're not scared to get their pans hot. They're not scared of fire. They're not scared of death. You know, you just sort of have to just be bold, be a bold cook. And they're bold with everything else too, I should say too, like salt. There's another story. I keep going on tangents, but why not? One of the chefs in the book was Harold Dieterle, who won season 1 of Top Chef, if you guys watched Top Chef. And he had me, he taught me how to make his creamed corn, which is one of his famous dishes at Perilla in New York. And so all it is fresh corn that you cook with cream. You blend up half of it, and then you stir it in with more fresh corn, and that's his creamed corn. And at the end, he said, okay, Adam, like, why don't you season it? So I took the salt shaker and I put it on the little sprinkle holes, and I sprinkled some salt in, and I stirred it around, and I tasted it. And he's like, what do you think? I was like, I think it's good. Why don't you taste it? So then he took a spoon and he tasted. He said, mm-hmm. And he took the dial and he turned it to the hole at the top. He turned the salt thing upside down, and like a stream of salt went pouring in. He turned it back up, turned it around. I was like, oh, now taste it. And I was like, whoa. You know, it was just like the difference between, you know, like a candle and a firework. It was just like, it was like explosively flavorful. And chefs just add tons of salt. They add tons of butter. They get their pans really hot. They're bold. Chefs are bold. Okay, enough tangents. Number 6 is use your ears, which is tied into the whole being engaged in the kitchen, to engage with food as you make it. And so one of the chefs, who I actually just did a dinner with here in San Francisco at Tartine After Hours, her name's Samin Nosrat. She's amazing. She's sort of a home cook. She's done some things in restaurants in San Francisco. Anyway, she taught me how to make her buttermilk marinated chicken, where you take a whole chicken, you marinate it in buttermilk, and then you roast it. So we were in the other room while the chicken was being roasted, and she heard a loud sizzle. And she said, the chicken's talking to me. I have to go. I'll be right back. And she went into the kitchen and she lowered the temperature in the oven. And I said, oh, so you just heard that and you knew? She goes, yeah, it sizzled, so I knew it's too hot. I had to lower the temperature. And again, that's sort of tied into the sort of not using a timer, being engaged, again, like reacting to food as it's cooking. That's what chefs do. Number 7 is a pretty good rule, which is just don't use pepper the way that you use salt. Salt and pepper are not always, they don't always go together. And in fact, 95% of the time, chefs did not use pepper when they season something. They season it with salt, and they use all different kinds of salt. They use sea salt, they use kosher salt, they use Himalayan rock salt, they use all different kinds of salt. But pepper is only used when they want to add that very specific peppery flavor to something. And I think a lot of people think they're just going to add salt, add pepper, add salt, add pepper, and that's not how chefs do it. Chefs add pepper only if they want that flavor. So that's something to think about. Number 8, I think you guys will like, which is use the internet. Which is a lot of chefs who are actually very humble about the fact that they don't know everything and they want to learn things, and that if they don't know something, they're not afraid to go on the internet and look it up. So Naomi Pomeroy, who's the chef at Beast in Portland, which is an amazing restaurant, she told me she uses the internet all the time to learn new techniques and to learn things. And I think that that's important because I think a lot of people at home feel like they have to either be an authority when they make food, they have to know everything, that you know. And it's like to open yourself up and to be open to learning and bringing new things into what you do already is important. And I think a lot of chefs were open to that. Okay, number 9, I think this is the most important rule because I think this is the difference between actually cooking and not cooking, which is clean with fluidity. So when I started my blog and I started cooking, I would do what probably a lot of you do, which is I would cook a dish or I'd make dinner. I would pile dishes in the sink. I would go watch TV, go watch something on Netflix, go to sleep, check my email the next day, go to do my work. And those dishes would sit and they would kind of crust over and a whole like family of bacteria would grow in there. You know, chefs never do that. Chefs are always cleaning while they're cooking. It's a fluid process. So what they would do is if they're like sauteing something in a pan, they would pour whatever's in the pan into a bowl. They take that pan, they put it in the sink, they run water. They stir around the bowl, they put that into another pan. They take that bowl, they put it in the sink, they run water. And then they put it in the oven, they clean those 2 bowls. They wipe down the counter, the thing comes out of the oven, they plop it onto a cake stand, they clean that thing. And so they're always cleaning while they're cooking, which makes tons of sense because when you're done, you have a beautiful plated dish and you have a clean kitchen. It's wonderful and makes you cook more. Because when I have dinner parties now, I do that. If I have a dinner party, I'll make the dessert. So I'll make a cake and then I'll clean all the baking stuff that I use to make the cake. Then I'll make the next dish. And so when I'm done, when people come over to eat dinner, the kitchen is spotless, the food is prepared, and all I have to do is just clean the dishes, the plates that people ate off of. And it makes a huge difference for people. I think a lot of people don't like to do dishes. And so if you clean with fluidity, if you clean while you go, you'll cook a lot more. Finally, number 10 is remember everyone makes mistakes. There's a funny little anecdote from the book, which is Elizabeth Faulkner, who was the pastry chef here at Citizen Cake and Orson, although now she's moved to Brooklyn. I don't know if you guys know that. I think Citizen Cake closed. Do you guys know if it closed? Did it close? That's so sad. Well, anyway, so I was cooking with her, and she was teaching me how to candy bacon for a salad. So she had the pan on the stove, she had the bacon, she had maple syrup in it, she was candying it, and her back was to the stove, and she was talking to me, and I was asking about her life and how why she got interested in cooking. And as we were talking, the pan burst into flames. But she was in the middle of like an emotional story, and I was like, I was like watching, and I was like, I'm sorry. I was like, is that pan supposed to be on fire? And she's like, oh. And so she grabbed the pan, and this is the important part. She grabbed the pan, she put the flames out, she put it in the sink, she ran some water, got another pan, put it on the stove, put some bacon in it, put some maple syrup in it, turned on the heat, and before I could even blink, the other pan was clean, the bacon was candied, and that was it. And she just recovered so quickly from that mistake that it was as if it never happened. And I think for home cooks, when a mistake happens, for me, if I make a mistake in the kitchen, it's like I need like weeks of therapy afterwards to like want to cook again. And I think that seeing how chefs recover when they screw up was actually really important, because you realize that it's not about the mistake, it's about the recovery. It's about picking yourself up and moving on and just getting back on your feet and getting going again. So that's the 10th of my 10 essential rules for learning how to cook. And so I think at this point, if you guys have questions about this book, I'd love to answer them. Or I can keep talking more if you'd like. There's a microphone there, so don't be shy.
So as everyone here knows, we have a lot of health problems in America.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of people attribute that to the lost art of home cooking.
Mm-hmm.
So you had this great experience when you were in school where you cooked for the first time and like had a breakthrough moment and became a serial cook. How can we get other people to have that experience and really learn to love home cooking, like, and get that initial experience and then holding on to it?
That's a really good question. Thanks for that. I mean, I think the key is not to think of cooking as a chore and to think of cooking as a treat. And I think the way that you do that is you don't make it punishing to start. So if you want to make the most decadent chocolate cake in the world, or you want to make donuts at home, or you want to make something really bad for you, but you want to do it from scratch, I think that's a great way to start, because people don't want to learn how to cook and learn how to make some healthy dietetic dish that's just sort of sad and depressing. I actually think that the more you start by just being indulgent and decadent at the beginning as a cook and just making the food that sounds so delicious to you can't even imagine something tasting better, so that it's a treat, so that it's something you really look forward to, then you can kind of cut back and scale back and start making food that's more realistic and healthy. And I think the mistake too many people make when they start cooking at home is that they punish themselves. They make food that they don't get excited about. And I think you have to get excited about the dish that you're making. That's, to me, the key. And the other thing, of course, is just really like, I actually think it's psychological too. I mean, I think some people they're just not into the idea of cooking. It's like you can't really make somebody a cook if they don't really have that interest, Like my mom doesn't have that interest at all. And I've been doing this for 8 years, and it's not like she's reading my blog, which she does, and then inspired to cook one day. She's never going to want to do it. So unfortunately, I think some people just don't have that interest. So but I do think for those that do have the interest, to just kind of be, and just treat yourself at the beginning and then scale back. I think that's a good way to get started.
Well, so you said the hardest part of writing the book was convincing all the 50 chefs to work with you on this.
Uh-huh.
How did you actually do that? And were there times that people said, absolutely not, and you were able to convince them to do it?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was psychological. So it was really, to be very honest, it was like getting names, like recognizable names in the book, and then calling up a chef and saying, hey, I have so-and-so and so-and-so who's done it. Why don't you do it? There's a little bit like that. And it was funny, like I'm not going to name names, but there was a city I went to for the book where there were 2 very famous chefs. And I called the first chef. And when I say I called the chef, it's never the chef. It's the PR team. It's the people handling the chef. And I said to the PR team for this famous chef, I was like, hi, I'm coming to your city. I'd love to cook with your chef. And they were like, sorry, he's very busy. No, this is not a project he'll want to do. So then I called the other chef and I was like, I'd like to cook with you. I'm coming to your city. And they said, yeah, we'd love to do it. So great. So then I called back the first team, the first chef, and I was like, well, I just want to let you guys know that I'm cooking with this other chef, and this other chef is sort of going to represent your city now, and I just want to make sure that's okay, because your chef is really not going to be in the book, and it's going to kind of look like this other chef is like the star chef of this city, and they're like, oh, actually, he does have some time in the morning and night. So it was all little games, but like also on that front, like there were chefs who I scheduled to cook with who at the very last second would cancel. And it would really like throw us into a turmoil, or it was just, I had a photographer that took all the snapshot pictures in the book. So she would take a day off work and I would buy the travel, so there was one chef I'm thinking about, we bought train tickets, we were all ready to go, and then they just called and canceled and couldn't do it anymore. So it was a lot of that. It was a lot of dealing with chefs who changed their mind at the last minute. But overall, what was great about the book though, the reason I'm so proud of it, and the reason I actually think it's a great book, is that all of the chefs who ended up doing it really were engaged with it, and they really were excited to teach. It was like a chance for them to share what they know with somebody who really wanted to learn it. And I think all the chefs who said no, I'm glad that they're not in the book, because if they had hesitation to do the book, then I wouldn't want to have them in the book. So for the most part, the chefs that did the book were eager to do it. And now there are a couple of chefs. Naomi Pomeroy in Beast in Portland was really funny. You'll see in her chapter, there's a recipe for her lentils, which I called Lentil Palooza because there's so much in it. And so she was kind of a little bit like guarded. So she'd be like making these lentils, and I would say like, what did you just put in there? She'd be like, sun-dried tomatoes, and I'd be writing down sun-dried tomatoes, and then she'd like add 3 other things. Like, wait, what was that? What was that? And like every time I turned my back, she would be adding more things. So it was sort of a little bit like I had to like drag some things out of certain chefs. But overall, they were eager to share, and it was really great. So thanks for your question. So the question is, how do you shop at farmers markets and not get overwhelmed? And I still get overwhelmed. It's true. I think the key is to go on a day, like my routine, mostly I'm living in LA these days, is to go on Monday to the farmer's market. Monday is important that it's Monday. It's not Thursday, it's not Saturday, it's Monday, which means that I'm buying stuff for the week. Sunday and Monday. It's like, it changes how you shop, because I think when I was going on Friday, or if I went on Saturday, it's like, oh, I'm just shopping for a meal. So I need to just buy something for a meal. What am I going to make? I don't even know. I'm so overwhelmed. Whereas if you go on a Monday, you just grab things and you don't even have to think about what you're going to make. You just have to give yourself a license to buy stuff. Because I think that's the key. For me, it's like I wouldn't give myself permission to spend money on those heirloom tomatoes because I wasn't sure how I was going to use them. But when I changed my attitude about it, and I was like, no, I'm just going to buy them. They look beautiful. I'm going to bring them home, and I will figure something out when I get home. And I think that's the key. So you just buy, like a good strategy for me is I'll take a $20 bill out of my wallet, I'll put it in my pocket, and like that's what I'm spending today at the farmer's market. I'm going to spend $20. And I'll just walk around and I'll just buy things, and I take the change, put it in my pocket, and just buy. Sometimes I just buy fruit. And I don't just buy fruit, but I'll buy fruit to snack on just so I have that in the house. So that's something to buy at the farmer's market that will always taste better than something at the grocery store. And then other times, though, I'll try to make myself buy something I don't know what it is or how to use it, and I'll learn. Like garlic scapes are a good example. Like garlic scapes are these crazy-looking things that grow on top of garlic. And so I bought those once. I had no idea what they were. I brought them home, and I looked up a recipe. There's actually one in the book for garlic scape pesto, where you just blend it up with olive oil and some nuts, and you can make a delicious pasta sauce. So $20 in your pocket, give yourself license to just buy anything and everything, bring it home, put it on display, and then make yourself cook from that during the week and use the internet. And does that answer your question? Okay, good.
Things you can share on seafood and barbecuing?
A specific,
Any anecdotes, stories of chefs, kind of that combination? Those are things I'm very interested in.
Seafood is interesting because I didn't cook a lot of seafood before I wrote this book, because I found it difficult, because I think seafood more than anything else matters to get it really fresh. And so I would go to the grocery store near where I lived, and it would always be wrapped in plastic, or I didn't have the energy to go drive to the really nice fish place all the time. But one of the chefs in the book is Jonathan Waxman, who is a chef at Barbuto in New York, and he was on Top Chef Masters, and they called him Obi-Wan because he's sort of a Zen master. And he, when I was cooking with him, had a fisherman came in with this giant swordfish. It looked like that, like a wheel of Parmesan cheese, but it was swordfish. And so what was really fascinating was he improvised this fish stew, it's in the front of the book, where he sliced a big fillet off the fish, he cut it into cubes, and then he had me do all this, because that was what was great about him, is he was a great teacher, so he had me do all the cutting, all the cooking. And so into a pot, we cooked some garlic and some fennel and some onions. Then we added the fish, and we added some mussels and clams and some white wine, put the lid on. And he made it seem so casual, as if it was just the easiest thing in the world. And the key step, this might be useful, is just to cook it just enough. Like whenever I made seafood before, I tended to overcook the seafood, and overcooked seafood is terrible. So the key is just to cook it just enough that it's just cooked, and then you take it out. So, I think with fish especially, what I sort of learned is it goes from translucent to opaque. So you look at the color, and if it looks, you can see through it, it's not done. So using the color, and then we poured that out into a bowl, and it was the most beautiful, fragrant, delicious seafood stew. And it was really all about having that wonderful fresh fish and using it in a really simple way and cooking it just the right amount to make something delicious. So maybe that's helpful to you, I don't know. But yeah, really getting the best fish you can get and cooking it just enough is sort of the best advice I can give about seafood. To me, the thing that makes the book great, or like what I'm proudest of about the book, is really trying to capture these people's lives, these chefs' lives, who they are, and how that ties into the food that they taught me. And to me, the most moving, or probably the most emotional, was Gina De Palma is the pastry chef at Babbo in New York, which is Mario Batali's restaurant. And when I cooked with her, she was recovering from stage 4 ovarian cancer. And she was in remission, and she was going through all that. And so her mother had been making her this lentil soup to feed her during her recovery. And that was the soup that she ate as she got better from cancer. And so basically that was the dish that she taught me how to make when I was in her kitchen. And even though it's a lentil soup, and whenever people ask me what my favorite recipe in the book is, and I say lentil soup, they kind of give me a look like lentil soup. But to me, it's first of all, it's a delicious recipe. It has garlic oil that you drizzle on at the end, and it has sausage, and it has kale, it has lots of great stuff in it. But much more importantly, it was the emotional sort of how meaningful this recipe was to her. It made it very meaningful for me, and so it wasn't the pyrotechnics of like a pan full of flames. It was more this really meaningful recipe that somebody shared with me, and the fact that she opened up her life and story to me. That's the dedication at the front of the book, is to all the chefs who let me into their kitchens and let me into their lives, because that's what they did. They really opened their doors, and I got to meet them and meet their families and really hear their stories. So that's probably how I'd answer that question.
One of the big differences I've seen between a lot of kind of restaurant cookbooks and cookbooks that are more meant for home cooks is a lot of the restaurants will make up large batches of individual components that are finished in some way, and then kind of mix and match them. Have you found any good ways of kind of adapting that for home use, or have you tried to go towards things that don't have quite as many
I'm more of a one pot guy. I like when I have people over for dinner, I love to make a braised dish where you can cook short ribs or some kind of fatty meat for a long time so it breaks down, and you just have that pot simmering on the stove when people show up, and you can just spoon it out. Because that other kind of cooking, which is very restaurant driven, and I think there are a lot of people at home who sort of, they kind of like the challenge of making that kind of food, which is why books like the 11 Madison Park cookbook or the Alinea cookbook or the El Bulli cookbook, all those books do well, because I think there are fanatics who will make all those crazy components. So one of the chefs in the book is Curtis Duffy, who is a Michelin-starred chef who had a restaurant called Avenues in Chicago, and now he's opening up a different restaurant called Grace. So when I came to cook with him, he sort of got nervous, because he was like, Adam, I have to tell you, these dishes that I make at this restaurant, you're never going to be able to adapt them for the home cook. I was like, what are you talking about? I can adapt anything. He's like, well, look at me. He's like, this is my corn soup. And this corn soup has a dome made with liquid nitrogen that's made with coconut milk and burnt corn husk oil that you dip with on the back of a ladle and dip into liquid nitrogen, and you put the dome on top of the corn soup, and then you shatter the dome into the soup. You're never going to be able to do that. And I was like, well, how do you make the soup? He's like, well, the soup is corn that you blend up, and then you strain it, and then you cook it and you blend it with sugar and olive oil. I was like, teach me that. So he taught me just how to make the corn soup. And it's absolutely the best corn soup I've ever had in my entire life. So in the book, when you see the corn soup, it's just corn soup, but it's a great corn soup. And it's a corn soup that you can make for your family, you can make for a dinner party, and it doesn't ask you to buy liquid nitrogen, it doesn't ask you to make burnt corn husk oil, and so those are things that I'm not interested in. That's sort of my, the book is sort of it's like my point of view, taking these recipes, filtering them through my point of view. And my point of view is to cook more crowd-pleasing, comforting, sort of realistic dishes, not the dishes that have 30 components on them. So that's a great question, and yeah, it's not my cup of tea to do that, but I really admire those who do. Thanks. Well, thank you guys so much for having me here today. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I'll be signing the book afterwards, so go buy a copy, and thanks again.